Hi again. A.T. Robertson, The Divinity of Christ and the Gospel of John. He's now reached chapters 18 and 19, and he entitles this chapter 5, The Scorn of Christ's Enemies, and puts a phrase that's become resonant through the ages in its English as well as its Latin form. Ecce homo, behold the man. Now, he subtitles this section, Into Gethsemane. Jesus went forth over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden, into which he entered himself and his disciples. He went forth from the place where he had been praying, went on through the gate, and down into the valley, the disciples full of troubled thoughts. John's Gospel omits all reference to the institution of the Lord's Supper at the close of the Passover meal, and before the discourse and prayer given in John 14:17. Luke notes that it was the custom of Jesus to go on to the Mount of Olives, and Matthew and Mark identify this place of prayer as Gethsemane. John omits also the narrative of the agony in the garden, but adds in 18:2 that Judas knew the place whither Jesus was in the habit of going in the night to pray. John emphasizes the fact that Judas took advantage of his knowledge of Jesus' habits in prayer to betray him. But even so, he comes not only with police officers from the Sanhedrin, that is, chief priests and Pharisees, but also with the band of Roman soldiers from the garrison in the Tower of Antonia, a revelation of Jewish fear of Jesus. They may have dreaded a popular uprising after the arrest. This band of soldiers had weapons. They also had lanterns and torches. It was full moon, but it may have been cloudy, and there would be shadows from the olive trees in the garden. So the conspirators would take no chances of failure. John, in 18:4, comments on the fact that Jesus is fully aware of the plans of his enemies, knowing all things that were coming upon him. This is fully shown in the synoptic account of the agony as Jesus arises to meet the betrayer. And John also tells of Christ's command to Judas. So Jesus steps forth out of the enclosure to meet the party coming to arrest him, and boldly challenges them. In verse 4, he avows his identity and exerts his power over the company in a marvelous manner. They not simply went backward, but fell to the ground. And we should note here, this is really the climax of the I am sayings in the Gospel of John. 3 times in this brief passage, Christ says, I am, ego eimi in Greek, and they fall down after the first I am. So, of course, Christians have made much of this over the ages and still do, and I think with good reason. Robertson comments, thus he proved his mastery over his enemies and showed to Judas the rest that he gave himself up voluntarily, not because they came against him with armed soldiers. This episode must have staggered Judas a bit, but he was too deep in the mire to draw back now. John does not mention the despicable kiss of Judas, the sign of his companions. It was not really needed. The sign, rather, to his companions. It was not really needed, though carried out, since Jesus confessed his identity and made a plea for the freedom of the 11. That is in 18:8. They had no trouble in seizing and binding Jesus, as was customary with dangerous criminals. The chief captain or military tribune had actually come along. The Sadducees had represented Jesus as an enemy of public order. Simon Peter could stand this procedure no longer and made use of one of the 2 swords, but that they happened to have with them in an effort to cut off the head of Malchus, servant of the high priest. But he only got his right ear, probably because Malchus dodged. Jesus healed the ear and bade Peter put up his sword, adding with the calmness won through his agony, the cup that my Father hath given me, shall I not drink it? So it was all over. Jesus not only would not resist arrest, he would not even allow his disciples to fight for him. They that take the sword shall perish with the sword, as all the world is now seeing. When he says, as all the world is now seeing, he's reflecting on the fact that this is written in the World War I period, by the way. Jesus had 12 legions of angels at his command if he wished to use them. The death of Jesus is thus shown to be voluntary, as it had to be, to possess moral value for our sins. But the effect on the disciples was disastrous, for they all fled in terror to save themselves from a like fate. It was indeed the hour and the power of darkness. That's the words of Christ in Luke 22:53. Next time, Jesus before Annas. Put in a link to 3 videos, I believe it is, linked together, the first of which is on your screen. The deity of Christ in the early church. The dawning realization of just who Jesus Christ was, is, and ever shall be. See you soon.